Alright, this is an improvised story based on the randomly generated word. A random word generator here. Burial. Starting off hot with the word burial. Alright. The crowd gathered around the grave, and the priest raised his voice to the sky and said, "We commend to you, O heavenly spirit, the soul of this poor fellow named Winston P. Penniford." Now, Winston was a sad man. Winston was a man of poverty and a man of very few means. And a voice called out from the crowd and said, "Excuse me, that's a little rude to be coming out right up top with that about someone who just died. Can we lighten it up, maybe speak a little more positively?" And the priest said, "I'm sorry, Winston Jr. I only mean to be honest, for as we all know, the heavenly spirit, you cannot lie. You cannot lie to the heavens, you cannot lie to yourself, and I sure as hell, pardon my language because I'm a priest, will not lie to you good people, and to the eternal soul of your kindly father." And Winston said, "All right, I'm gonna step in here, priest. Thank you for all you've done. Actually, you know what? Don't thank you. You've done enough, and I didn't care for it. So move along, sir." And the priest shuffled off. Didn't even care to stick around to hear what Winston Jr. had to say. He just moseyed on along and wandered off into the graves. And Winston took his place behind the pedestal, the podium. That's the word for it. Why do they always have podiums in movies in funeral scenes? I've never seen that in real life. But anyway, he took his place behind the podium and said, "My father was a good man. My father was a strong man. Oh, how strong he was. Not strong of spirit, mind you, but strong of physical strength. He was, in fact, incredibly weak in his spirit. Anytime he made a conviction or said he would do something or wouldn't do something, he broke down very easily at the first questioning from my mother or myself. But oh, his physical strength was something to behold. He built our house with his bare hands. He put the pillars up himself, stone pillars too, not just normal wooden beams. He was strong as hell, pardon my language. Up top once again, as the priest said. And oh, Papa Winston, I will miss your weak spirit. I will miss your physical strength. Even in your old age, at 70 years old, you are the strongest man I ever knew." And all of a sudden, a crack rang out, and everyone looked around. And then another crack, and suddenly a hand burst through the coffin. And everyone erupted in a great frenzy and fervor. And Winston fled to the coffin and said, "Oh my goodness, Father, you're alive. How could we be so foolish?" And he threw it open, and then the hand grabbed Winston by the throat and squeezed, and Winston's head popped off like a grape. And Winston Sr., this is going so far off the rails, so fast. I'm here for it. Winston Sr. grabbed Winston Jr.'s body and threw it 50 feet into the graveyard, and he stood up, a giant hulking man. Not a man anymore, but a giant hulking zombie. And he stood up, and the entire crowd freaked out. And he strode calmly, quite calmly, into the crowd, looking for more people to pop their heads off like grapes, and they all ran away in fear. Then night fell. No one knew where the zombie went. Everyone was too afraid to try and keep track. The police were sent to catch this rogue, incredibly strong 70-year-old zombie man, but they couldn't find him. And it is said that he may have fled to the forest. People started to spread word because the trees were just there, just behind the graveyard and the cemetery. And days passed and no one heard a thing. And then weeks passed and no one heard a thing. And then years passed and still no one had ever heard what may or may not have happened to old Winston P. Pennyforth. People assumed that his body simply decayed. He was a zombie after all, and the town went on as normal. And his wife, his poor widow, was terribly troubled by the events of that day. For obvious reasons, her deceased husband became a zombie and popped her son's head off like a grape. But she had no choice but to carry on with her own life, and she was a librarian and loved her work, and so she busied herself in the library, and she gave all the children recommendations of happy things to try and take their mind off of her deceased husband potentially lurking in the woods as a zombie giant monster Frankenstein. And she carried on as best she could. And then she met a man who came to town, and she was in her 70s as well, and this new man was a great lover of books and literature, and he took a shine to her, and her name was Meredith Pettiforth, of course, and again, they began talking about books and talking about each other's lives, and this man was, of course, very fascinated by Meredith's life story and her zombie ex-husband, and they eventually took each other as lovers and moved in together, and he began to work at the library as well, just on a volunteer basis, because they loved spending time together so. And then one day, when they were closing up, they heard a great knock, knock, knock at the door of the library. It was a tremendous sound. It was this big, great oak doors. It was quite a beautiful library. And, well, the man who had found Meredith and fallen in love with her, let's call him Jim. He went to the door to see who it was and to just kindly tell them that the library is closed for the day and to come on back tomorrow. And he opened the door, and who did he see there in the rain but a towering zombie who he knew could be no one else other than the legend himself, Winston Pennyforth Sr. And well, Jim was terrified, of course, but he couldn't move from his fright. And Winston grabbed him by the scruff of his neck, his tie. He's one of those really, jaunty fellows who wears a tie every day in his old age. And Winston grabbed the tie and he lifted him up. And then he heard Meredith say, "Winston?" from the deeper in the library. And something cut through his zombie mind, and he put Jim down and he looked back at Meredith. Meredith said, "Winston, you must rest now. You have passed on, and I have taken on a new lover, and we had such a wonderful time together. I actually wish you had come home instead of just being in the woods. You clearly have some presence of mind." And Winston said, "Yes, I'm actually perfectly sound of mind. It's just sort of a body thing, this whole zombification, but in fact, I remember everything. I remember my life, and I must say that while I missed you every day, I didn't want to be a burden upon you, for how could you go back to living your life if I, a zombie man, lived with you? The town would shun you, Meredith, and I could not allow such a thing to happen to you." And Meredith said, "Oh, Winston, you always were so kindly and sweet to me." And they hugged and they embraced. And Winston said, "I have learned much from the forest creatures. They are my friends now, the woodland critters and the deers and the squirrels and the chipmunks. Those are my favorite. My best friend, actually, is a chipmunk. I named him I named him Jim. And Jim looked up at me and said, Jim, that's my name. And Winston looked down at him, and Winston smiled, and the two men shook hands. And Meredith said, well, Winston, I must tell you, this is my new companion Jim, and we are quite fond of one another. And Winston said, I know. I've seen him around your house, around our old house, because while I didn't want to disturb you, I, of course, miss you every day. And Meredith said, you know, we live right on the edge of the woods. I don't see why you shouldn't come inside and enjoy your time and enjoy your time with me and I with you and bring Chipmunk Jim and I'll have Human Jim and we could all live together. And Jim and Winston looked at each other and Winston said, would you be all right with that, Jim? And Jim said, well, of course. I've heard many things about you and you seem like you were a great man and clearly I can see today you are a great man. And Winston the next day came back with Chipmunk Jim and Chipmunk Jim's whole family. And they lived all together in that house, Meredith, Jim, Winston Pennyforth, and the Chipmunk family Jim. And they lived happily ever after as fellow companions and, well, soon enough, of course, the rest of them died too, and clearly Winston's zombieism was contagious because they all became zombies as well. And then they were just the zombie house, and Meredith was so sweet and was still such a good librarian that, well, no one seemed to really mind, and Winston's concerns never bore out. And he began a zombie construction firm, him and Zombie Jim, and Meredith kept working at the library, and if you go to that town today, they're still there. Meredith the librarian, Winston and Jim the construction workers. Jim's more of a planner, he's not quite as strong as Winston. And the family Chipmunk Zombie Jim. Zombie Chipmunk family. They're the mascots of the construction firm, and the youngest of the zombie chipmunk children like to scurry around the library, and it's a spooky, ghostly, wonderful time that's had by all. And let that be a lesson. That while you might have fears of being accepted for being a super strong zombie man or whatever you may be, that the world will always hopefully treat you with more kindness and acceptance than you treat yourself. The end. Yeah, alright, that one was a fun one. I like how it went super off the rails and got real dark. Man, Zombie Winston straight up murdered his own son at the beginning. I apologize for that. Maybe that's why I course corrected. Not course corrected, it's just what happened. And it became quite a sweet story after that. Maybe like all the darkness happened up top. Never saw that priest again. But yeah, there we go. What do we call that one? I don't know, body and mind, because we had like super strong Jim or super strong Winston and the librarian Meredith. Zombie body, zombie mind. Sure, we'll do that. Or zombie love. No, that sounds way too. Sounds like a different kind of story, if you know what I mean. I'm gonna end it there. I'll call it like zombie body, something like that. We'll see what happens. We'll see what the title ends up being. Go ahead and like and subscribe, and see you next time.